Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicola Cherniak, and I'm the Client Services Manager at Epilepsy Southwestern Ontario. Thank you so much for joining us. So throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, Epilepsy Toronto and Epilepsy Southwestern Ontario have noticed an increase in youth and their parents reaching out for support with mental health. Because of this, we decided to join forces to bring you a webinar that focuses on youth mental health and its relationship with epilepsy. We're very lucky to be joined by a panel of experts on mental health who all have very close connections with epilepsy. So today we welcome Jamie Shammy, who is a pediatric epilepsy educator at Epilepsy Southwestern Ontario, and Michael Alex, who is a learning strategist at Inside Out Learning. So before we begin, just a quick note to our audience members. Please feel free to leave any questions in the comments section, and we'll get to as many as possible in the last 15 minutes during the Q&A period. We ask that you just please refrain from sharing any personal medical information in the comments section. So we're going to be starting our webinar today by chatting with Jamie Shammy. And Jamie was diagnosed with epilepsy when she was 14 years old. Originally, she was only having absence seizures, but later began having generalized tonic-clonic and focal with impaired awareness seizures as well. After experiencing multiple daily seizures for years, she's remained seizure-free for the past 5 years. Jamie's journey with epilepsy inspired her to help others, so she completed her university practicum at Epilepsy Southwestern Ontario, helping to develop the youth program, YET. Since then, she's worked as the YET program facilitator, client services manager, and now she's an epilepsy educator. As an epilepsy educator at Epilepsy Southwestern Ontario, her roles and responsibilities are to provide epilepsy education to parents, schools, and the community. So welcome, Jamie.
Awesome, thanks, Nicola.
We're going to ask you just a few questions today. So first off, can you share a little bit about your seizure history and how it impacted your mental health as a youth?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely a big question to answer. So I'll just start off with just a little bit more about my journey with epilepsy. So as you said, I was diagnosed with epilepsy at 14. It wasn't just, a quick, easy diagnosis. It was about a year before we sort of realized what was going on. So it was really hard for me to sort of explain what was happening. I sort of felt fuzzy, and I don't really know how to explain it other than that, but something felt off. I felt fuzzy, something was weird. So when I did finally see a neurologist, I was diagnosed with absence seizures, like you said. And I did take medication for a few years, which helped control them, which was great. There was still challenges there, which I'll touch on later, but so 2 years I was seizure-free. And then I turned 16. The day I went to go get my driver's license, I had my first tonic-clonic seizure. So it was pretty overwhelming and upsetting because I had gone so long being seizure-free, and now I'm experiencing another different type of seizure. So it was definitely upsetting, and for the next 4 years or so, I continued to have tonic-clonic seizures as well as focal impaired awareness seizures. So I sort of got a bunch of seizures under my belt. And they ranged anywhere from 1 a day to 10 a day. So things did get pretty bad. I missed a big chunk of my high school days because I was having so many seizures. And for those of you watching who have epilepsy, you might understand that, epilepsy doesn't just equal seizures. It can equal many things. It can equal body pain, headaches, stress, just being tired all the time, and mental health, like we're talking about today. So I missed a lot of time. And when I turned 18, I went to go to university. I went to Western, and I continued to have about 10 seizures a day. So I was still having seizures quite often, and it got pretty bad. It was pretty tough, to be honest. Luckily, my doctor did prescribe cannabis for me, and while it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, definitely does not work for everybody. But I was lucky enough that it did work for me, and it has helped control my seizures since. So it's almost been 6 years that I've been seizure-free, which is great. And that's just really a quick summary. Talking about mental health today, there was a lot that I did struggle with throughout that journey, and it was definitely ups and downs. And it was definitely due to many different things. One of the big things, especially being a youth with epilepsy, that impacts you is sort of that FOMO piece, right? The fear of missing out. I experienced that so much, especially in high school and beginning of university, where I couldn't even go to class like most days. I think I missed like a good 3-month period at one point because I was just having so many seizures. So even the fear of even going to class, right, and being with my friends was awful. And then my license, that was another big one. So just that FOMO piece. And then additionally, I didn't know anybody else with epilepsy until I turned 19. So I really felt alone and isolated, and I felt like I was experiencing it alone. I was really lucky to have a really supportive friends and family network, but it's still a little different when you don't know anyone who knows exactly what you're going through, right? So there's that piece. Unfortunately, I experienced stigma as well. I'm upset to say that I did. I love when people tell me they haven't, and I do a little celebration for them, but unfortunately, I did in a few different ways. I experienced it from some of my teachers who, told me my seizures weren't real. Some people don't know that seizures come in many different shapes and sizes, right? From other classmates, people telling me I couldn't do certain things, people not agreeing maybe with the treatment option I was using. So I experienced that stigma there too. And then there's also the fear, right? What if I have a seizure in front of my friends? Or what if I go to this place and I have a seizure? So you live with that fear too. So I think it's not just, one thing that causes somebody to experience mental health challenges with epilepsy. I think it's oftentimes many different things. There's many different layers to it. But it was tough for sure. Looking back on it, there was obviously great parts too. But it was tough. It definitely wasn't an easy journey, but I'm in a good place now. I'm happy to say that for sure.
Good. Thank you so much for sharing, Jamie. It's quite obvious that you've overcame so much in the past few years.
Thanks.
And I can tell from working with you, of course, now that you're doing very well. So we do have another question here for you. So since COVID-19 began, have you seen an increase with youth mental health concerns?
Yeah, big time, big time. I would say, in the past, oh gosh, we're getting into 6 months here. Past 6 months, I've definitely had a lot more parents and adults, contact us with mental health concerns. I think, normally living with epilepsy can be a challenge. And now we've got this extra burden of COVID, right? So maybe feeling more isolated, maybe the fear of the unknown, because let's be honest, things are still unknown. It's been tough on people for sure. So, to anybody watching, if you are struggling with mental health, I know sometimes it's really hard to sort of make that first move and to reach out, but please don't hesitate to reach out to your local epilepsy agency. We can help guide you in the right direction or just provide you with some extra resources that you might find helpful. And there's no shame in that, right? So we all need a little bit of help sometime, and unfortunately, some of our cases have been quite sad. So please feel free to reach out if you are experiencing any crisis.
Great, thank you. And throughout your journey, what did you find helpful in terms of coping strategies when dealing with the psychosocial impact of epilepsy?
Yeah, so hindsight is a great thing, right? So if I look back on things, I probably would have done things differently. I really did struggle for many years, and I would say I struggled silently. I had, like I said, really supportive friends and family, but we've come a long way in how we talk about mental health. And I think we still have a long way to go, but at that time, people didn't talk about it as openly. I think Bell Let's Talk started when I was just graduating high school. So it was just sort of, the start of the conversation. So it's not something that I felt comfortable talking about, or even something I knew how to talk about. I knew, at 14 years old, I had these feelings inside, but I didn't know how to express them. And so that was really tough for me. And like I said, there's so many different layers to why somebody with epilepsy might struggle with mental health. I know for me, there would be weeks on end where I felt like I couldn't even get out of bed because I was having so many seizures. I was stressed, I was embarrassed, I was so exhausted. And so I would lay in bed. And at the time, there wasn't as many fun apps on phones or anything like that. And the TV would bother me. So I would just lay there with my thoughts. And I would sort of circle in those thoughts. And I wouldn't want to share them with anybody else. So that was really tough. looking back, I wish I had done things differently. So one thing that was had a really big positive impact for me was meeting somebody else with epilepsy. So it wasn't until I was 19 that that happened. And when I met this person, I was like, whoa, like a relief almost that came off my shoulders, because I'd always walk by, you know, the posters in the hospital that would say, oh, 1 out of 100 people have epilepsy. Okay, sure, but I've never met anybody else with epilepsy, so I don't know how true that is. So when I met this individual, it was just such a relief, because she had that empathy, like true empathy, that maybe other people were trying to sympathize and trying to empathize with me, but it wasn't the same, right? She truly understood what I was going through, and we were able to be that support for each other. So having that peer support is so huge. Another thing I really wish that I had done was get more education. So for years, I didn't know what my seizures were called. I couldn't even define epilepsy. Like if you had asked me, what's epilepsy? I'd be like, well, seizures, I guess. I didn't know the definition. I didn't know what to do when I had a seizure. I would say for 80% of my seizures, I'd go to the emergency room when I didn't need to, right? And it's just because I was scared and I didn't know what to do. So I didn't have that education there to empower myself. And a lot of the times, actually almost every day in high school, I would actually drive by Epilepsy Southwestern Ontario. And at the time, we were called Epilepsy Support Center. And when I would read the sign, I would think, I don't need support. Like, that's for people who need help. Like, that's not me. I don't need help. What do I need help for? And I think oftentimes the hardest part about that is just making that first step, walking through the door, saying, hey, I could use help with something. I don't know what, but maybe I could use your help. And education is one of those things that I think is so important, because if I had known those things, I would have felt so more empowered and stronger about my condition and not felt lost in it. Because oftentimes I felt really lost in the ambiguity of things. So the education piece, is so big. And then also school support. So another thing I struggled with was the school support. So again, that's that asking for help piece. I didn't think, I needed accommodations or I needed help at school. I was always pretty studious and academic. And so when this happened, it was, I came crashing down. And when it came to university, that was sort of the first time I sort of admitted, okay, I could probably use a bit of help. Some days I couldn't even function. So I actually did my studies part-time, so I only did 3 classes, and I did have accommodations. I wrote my exams in different rooms where the lighting didn't bother me as much. I had spaces between my exams to allow for a bit of a stress break, since my seizures are triggered by stress. And I just found that my professors were more understanding. And being through that process, it sounds so scary and intimidating, and at least for me, I thought, oh, it's going to make me seem weak, and it's kind of a little shot to the ego. At least for me it was. But going through it, I realized how helpful it was, and how silly I feel for feeling that way, because it's okay, and we all need that help sometimes. So the school support was super awesome. And then I think just admitting that, people need each other, right? Having that community and peer support, even just, my day-to-day working, I see the connections that people make together, and knowing that you have that community there to support you is so great. So I would say, I guess to sum it up, education. So educating yourself, getting a peer network, and finding different, resources to support you is definitely important.
Great, thank you so much, Jamie. So we do actually have one more guest who has joined us, Ed Cook. And Ed is a registered social worker, and he is also a transitional caseworker at the Canadian Mental Health Association. But before we move on to Ed, I'm going to just turn things over to Katie Armstrong, who's Director of Children and Youth Services at Epilepsy Toronto. And she is going to introduce you to another speaker, Michael Alex.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. And thanks so much, Jamie, for sharing your experience. I know a lot of our audience members can definitely relate to everything you spoke about. So now introducing our next speaker, Michael Alex. Michael is an experienced yoga, movement, and mindfulness teacher, which informs his wellness-based approach to learning. He believes the essential foundation for all growth, academic and otherwise, is learning to care for one's mind and body through accessible wellness practices and learning skills. His approach to yoga is as varied as the students with whom he is working. Whether it is formal practice, teaching in community settings, or pestering friends and family with yoga-inspired life hacks, Michael's approach is accessible, non-guru based, and fun. Having completed over 500 hours of training, Michael's ongoing work involves teaching yoga to teenagers and adults alike. Making play and experimentation, organizing principles for yoga practice is the passion that ties all the other threads of his work together. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
So we have some questions for you. We'll start off with seeing if you can just share a little bit about your work with mindfulness, mindfulness experience with epilepsy, and what you see most within your practice in terms of what you face in terms of mental health.
Okay, sure. There is a lot there. So I should say at the outset for everyone that's watching, I have a 3-year-old cockapoo, Henry, who may make a guest appearance. I apologize at the outset if we get some barking. Yeah, and tell me if I've come off track. But maybe I'll start by talking about my relationship with epilepsy and Epilepsy Toronto specifically. And just to be clear, I'm A-okay. I've gotten approval from my partner to share. I'm not speaking out of turn. So my partner, Krista, was diagnosed with epilepsy just about 10 years ago now. And I definitely, in hearing Jamie's stories, heard a lot of similarities, a lot of confusion on our part. You know, it took a couple of years to figure out what was going on. And so my learning curve has been super steep, but really unbelievably gratifying, actually. I'm super grateful for all the people I have met through the epilepsy community and who are unbelievable. And also just how much I've learned, not just about epilepsy, but about people and about yoga. I thought I had it all figured out. Not so much. Maybe just I'll try to tie the threads of my my teaching practice and epilepsy and teens and everything together sort of quickly, and you can let me know how I've done. So the Krista's diagnosis for epilepsy, the one thing I would say there is that I didn't take advantage of the supports that were available for exactly the same reasons that she had articulated. I didn't feel like, one, as a support member, as a family member, I felt like I would be like, it was kind of suck it up. Like, why are you complaining? You're not the one with epilepsy. And I wanted to say at the outset that for anyone out there who is a family member or caregiver, reach out for support. I suffered needlessly for years because especially if friends and family and coworkers and so on are this, a diagnosis of epilepsy, or not even a diagnosis, that the presence of seizures is very difficult for them often to understand as well. So just having that, as Jamie said, that friend or a kind ear who has that frame of experience, it's massive. My own embrace of yoga actually and mindfulness started partially as a result of that. This is definitely far from a universal experience, but in Krista's own practice, we're both yoga teachers actually. And when we did our training together, part of her reason for pursuing that was that she'd never had a seizure on the mat. It's something about regulating their nervous system and sort of her neural load dropping down as her body and mind relaxed. That's our best, estimation of why that's the case. And I kind of came along for the ride. My introduction really was related to first and foremost, not just people with epilepsy and the practice of mindfulness and yoga, but rather the teenagers who I was teaching at school. So I've been a high school teacher in the Toronto Public Board for just over 20 years. And most of that in an alternative school for students who have really special lives. So they're actors and singers and dancers and athletes and have lots going on, and therefore needed a lot of special accommodation. So about, I would say, right around the time of Chris's diagnosis, I had noticed a real uptick in, well, quite frankly, the number of people who were coming into my office, the number of students, young people who were coming into my office and in tears. Often, it was multiple times a year. Just the stress level among young people has gone up, and I've, you know, it's been documented. There are plenty of people talking about it, and having a front row seat. From my perspective as a teacher, I'm actually a history teacher by training, which is hilarious because it's the last thing I actually want to teach these days. I really truly did, once I did my teacher training and integrated yoga and mindfulness into my academic, if you will, teaching practice, it just became super clear that the skills and the aptitudes that you can develop through mindfulness and through really just developing a different sort of relationship with your body and your mind. I don't think it's a solution for all people. I want to be clear about that. Different things are going to work for different people, but certainly my own perspective is that the high school curriculum as it's currently set up is sorely lacking. It's just, yeah, I could go on and on about that, but I guess what I would say is, rather than focusing on the negative, what isn't happening, I turn my attention to what I could do. And so I developed a credit course called Yoga for Teens that for the past, going on 6 years now, I think, students can earn up to 2 of their high school credits by taking a full year course in yoga. And it's actually called Exploring Paths to Wellness, because the idea there is that there isn't any one particular way of not only doing yoga, but of living a life, right? And, I think I get the sense that if people saw what we were up to, often when I'm working with teens in that context, the yoga people I know would say, well, that doesn't look like yoga. And the teachers might say, well, that doesn't look like teaching, or that doesn't look like high school. And I guess I would say to both of them, awesome. It's all about really empowering young people to do some self-reflection, to kind of, try to make sense of it all, try to figure out what's next. So how those things tied together is after teaching yoga in yoga studios for several years, as well as in high schools, I had stepped back from that, and I felt like I wanted to be of service. This is one of the, from my perspective, one of the absolutely cool things about a yoga practice or meditation practice is that service really doesn't become optional. It's something that you almost feel compelled to do. And so I started to look around, like, where can I contribute? And I actually was going to try to volunteer with police, because my parents are both retired police officers, and I thought, I know what that stress is like. And it was Krista actually that said, well, come on, buddy, remember where you were a few years ago and what kind of support, you would have benefited from and you found in yoga, but that you maybe didn't know about. And so I reached out to the wonderful peeps at Epilepsy Toronto, and I've been teaching there for, I guess we're going on a couple of years now, and yeah, it's just my absolute favorite thing in the world. In terms of what youth face in terms of mental health, maybe I'll speak to that within the context of other questions. Is that a good overview though?
Yeah, that's great, Michael. Thank you so much for sharing that. So for the youth that are watching, and for parents of youth who are watching and really looking for those strategies and those coping ways, could you possibly walk us through some breathing exercises or strategies that you think would help youth cope when moments become a bit too unmanageable for them, or when those feelings of anxiety might be heightened?
Sure. Yeah. I think that I was thinking about what sort of advice I could give here. The one thing I wanted to say at the outset is, because many people, when I say that I work with teenagers, and I assume people might not be surprised by this, that the initial response is, oh my gosh, how do you handle it? The kids are such a handful, and teenagers and da 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 da. I have to say, I really think that that whole line of thinking, it's tired, it's not accurate, and people should let it go. Teenagers are awesome. They're, you know, from my perspective, what's so fantastic about working with young people is that they're open. They are open to possibility in a way that, uh, you know, occasionally you meet an adult that is as well, but it's something that it's hard to hold on to, not to lose as we get older. So the one thing I wanted to say to the adults in the lives of teenagers is honor their experiences. Like really see them and kind of get out of the way. Like let them say their piece. Let them share their experience without judging it, without trying to define it or put it into a little box. Um, in terms of actual mindfulness practices that young people can do. I mean, the one thing I would suggest at the outset is the strategy that works for you is always the best strategy. So when I say that what I will do at school that is quote unquote yoga might not look like yoga, it's because, you know, the idea of you know, for people who think about a yoga practice or a meditation practice being very solemn, very serious, and we're all super quiet and, you know, reverent and so on. I mean, it can be that. It can be a lot of different things, but I really like to encourage young people to engage in play. A simple sort of little check that you can do in your own body, and I actually would suggest starting there. I really believe in checking in somatically. Is just notice what you're feeling, how you're feeling. So it's as simple as literally almost hitting the pause button and saying, I know I have to attend to whatever. I've got, you know, this coming up at school, or this friend is texting me, or whatever's happening where feelings of overwhelm come up. A lot of times when, regardless of what our age is, when people are acting, they're reacting rather than responding. And so the simple act of just stopping, taking a breath, and then checking out what's going on in your body is a wonderful place to start. I have a whole series of practices there around both breath and somatic stuff. But I guess in general, if I was going to sum it up as an overall, if you notice tightness, if you notice constriction, so like our bodies, we tend to go into, if we're going into fight, flight, freeze, we tend to constrict, and literally you'll see people, they flex forward, they tuck in. So I actually will just encourage, like say to people, like, are you feeling tight? Where are you feeling it? You know, how are you feeling it? And a lot of times feelings of anxiety and stress will come up here, kind of at center of the heart or in the throat. And really just the process there is one of allowing yourself to slowly relax, like to open up. So I think of it as, if I am in at point A and I'm feeling super stressed and tight and all balled up, and then there's this place over here I don't feel like I can get to, which is open and, you know, expansive. I'm trying to use my breath to get from A to B. And there are a lot of ways of doing that, but I think that is fundamentally the biggest thing. Because if you're feeling open, if you're feeling, you know, and that's why, you know, the words I use a lot of times when I'm teaching are, if you are open to experimenting or you're open to play, you don't see many people are playing or like, you know, it doesn't happen. I mean, I guess the only other thing I would say, and my only little bit of reluctance to give specific practices in a context like this, is that it really does, it is the kind of practice that I guess I would suggest to people is practice it when you're not stressed. Because going to a breathing exercise when you are stressed, none were, in fact, and I should actually say, and I don't mind disclosing my own thing, I have struggled for most of my, actually right after I came out of university, or into university, I guess, I developed pretty significant panic attacks. I can't speak to all people. I know in my body that if to try to breathe when I'm panicking, that ain't happening. That's gonna make it worse. So it might sound like a silly thing, but I actually balance on one leg. That's it. I just lift my one foot up an inch off the ground and just steady myself. Now, obviously, in terms of seizures, there are safety considerations there, but sitting on the edge of a chair or even balancing on your sitting bones on the floor and just playing with that, as soon as you're tuning or tying your body into your mind and giving it something to do, what it can't do as well is worry. So I certainly wouldn't suggest to people bypassing that tough stuff. Like, you want to be able to work with it with support, but not when it's acute. So yeah.
That's really useful information, Michael, for sure. And then just quickly before we go to our next speaker, I'm just wondering, are there any barriers that you think would prevent individuals and youth from practicing mindfulness in your experience?
Yes, economic barriers for sure, barriers of access. I think that this, in terms of epilepsy in particular, I know that, my experience working with our class is that literally the in class, I mean, I was surprised and horrified to hear about some of the experiences that people had going to, quote unquote regular yoga classes. I assumed that going to a class in a studio that people would, of all abilities and natures and so on, would be welcome with open arms. But definitely I've heard stories about people facing stigma. Leaving those sorts of barriers aside, it's actually just physically getting to where the class is going to be safely. And in that sense, the Zoom stuff has actually been, a real silver lining in terms of what's going on. I think that also socially and culturally, one of the big barriers is that yoga is, well, one, I mean, I'm identify as man, and I know that for many young boys and male identified people, that yoga is something that girls do, or that that it's not cool. It's somehow, it's mystical and all the rest. And what I really try to encourage people to do is like, well, it could be, but not necessarily. And so really trying to break down, demystify that, show them that this is something that is it's just an exploration of what it means to be alive. And that's a birthright. So everyone should have access to that.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you so much, Michael. I'm going to pass it back to Nicola, and she's going to introduce our final guest speaker for today.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you, Michael, for sharing. So lastly, I'm just going to make sure, Ed, are you able to hear me okay? Oh, I can't hear you. Sorry, everyone, we're having a few technical difficulties today in this new world of Zoom. Let's see. So maybe I'll start off by reading Ed's bio out for everyone, and hopefully he's able to get his microphone on. So Ed is a registered social worker and a certified applied suicide intervention skills training facilitator. He's currently a transitional case manager with Canadian Mental Health Association Middlesex, and he's worked in the field of mental health for 20 years in various community-based positions, from housing to crisis services. Ed's most proud accomplishment in the field of social work is his development of the group Rock Talk, a group that focuses on connecting and navigating emotions through individual interpretations of music and lyrics. In 1999, at the end of his first year of college, Ed was diagnosed with juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. At the time, Ed was working in British Columbia, and he was experiencing odd twitching episodes, which were later confirmed to be seizure activity. Ed's epilepsy is managed by a combination of medications, rest, trying to live stress-free, and exercise, which mostly includes ice hockey.
I think we might move to question and answer just in the meantime, just in case Ed is able to log on correctly, just having some technical difficulties. So why don't we start some question and answers, and then if Ed's able to jump on, we'll kind of shimmy back to him. Does that sound like a plan?
Sounds good. Thanks, Katie.
So Michael, I just wanted to, we have a question about COVID and what you've been experiencing right now with mindfulness. Just in terms of, have you seen an increase in the need for mindfulness now more than ever with youth, just because of possible isolation, increased depression, anxiety? What's your experience so far 6 months in with COVID?
Yep. Yeah, the short answer is absolutely. Yes, I'm really concerned about the loss of social contact. That's what, in speaking with my students remotely, you know, I know that many parents are really concerned, and rightly so, about learning and about, you know, so-called learning deficits. I say so-called because I really don't think that 6 months, honestly, is that big a deal in terms of like lost learning. But 6 months of lost social contact at that age, and it's hard for all of us, but it's especially hard there. So, you know, I think there that if it's under or with the support of a teacher, for instance, or like there's lots of resources, and I can suggest them online, because the idea of being isolated, whether it's in a room or in your own head, in the sense of being like all those thoughts and nowhere to go, I think that having some roadmaps, some simple practices that you can put into practice are huge now.
So true, so true. Jamie, we have a question for you. If you could give a piece of advice to another youth experiencing mental health, what would that piece of advice be? Either newly diagnosed or has had the diagnosis for a while.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I would say time is your best friend. And I know that's not always a fun thing to hear. Every day gets a little better. What I was saying earlier, just, you know, try to be more open to help, and don't look at help as a negative thing. You know, asking for support or help, it doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you you know, not smart or not well equipped to handle things. It just helps. It just helps to make it better, right? So, and not being afraid to reach out to other people for that support, or even your local agency. Like I said, I didn't want to step foot in there because I didn't know what I needed help with, and I wish I did. And Nicola will know. I mean, sometimes we have people come into our office and they just sort of open the door and stand in the lobby, and they don't know what to ask for, right? So they don't know why they're here, but they're here. Even just doing that, and then we can help. We can tell you what programs and services we have that might be beneficial for you. So really just open yourself up to other people's help and support, and take it day by day. You know, don't look at things years in advance. Take it day by day.
Exactly. I would say asking for help is your first step in the right direction, right? It can be so challenging at first to ask for help and to acknowledge that you can't do everything on your own. You know, you do need those supports around you, and a support system isn't necessarily just family and friends. It's also your providers, your healthcare providers, your community support. So just asking for help, it can go a long way for sure. Yeah, Jamie, maybe you can help answer this next question. Somebody asks, are people with epilepsy more likely to experience anxiety or depression?
Yeah, great question. So I actually didn't know this for such a long time. And when I first did my university practicum here, I remember learning it. Our CEO, Michelle, said, oh, people with epilepsy are more likely to experience anxiety or depression and troubles with memory. And it was just like a big light bulb went off in my head, because I had no idea that was a thing. And so by me learning that also just it gave me comfort to know that, okay, there's not something wrong with me, right? This is very normal. So yes, the answer is yes. So it's about 25 to 50% of people might experience some mental health difficulties that have epilepsy. I always recommend to people, if you do notice a change in your mental health, definitely speak to your neurologist about it. A lot of the times people, categorize them just to do with epilepsy, but they might also be able to support you with your mental health. Some medications work for, seizures as well as depression. So it's definitely worth bringing up to your neurologist, as well as, of course, checking out community supports too.
For sure. That's great information to give to our audience. Let me just look through our questions here. I have one, I think for Michael. It says, whenever I try to practice mindfulness, I can never stay present. How do I work on this?
Great question. By trying over and over again is the simplest answer, which can be frustrating to hear, but the actual practice, I think many times initially people think, oh, I got lost in thought, or I'm distracted by something, so I'm not being present. Actually, the being present is the exact moment that you wake up, that you go like, oh, I'm distracted. And the cool thing about the practice is that the more you do it, the capacity for focus or for calm or whatever it is that you're practicing for, it increases. So it's just like, honestly, self-compassion is huge. Go easy on yourself and try again.
So helpful. Yeah. Don't give up, right? Just keep trying. I know even for myself years ago, I tried a little bit of mindfulness and I struggled so much with it because it was during a stressful time and I just had so many things going on in my mind. I couldn't center myself, but then I tried it again a year later and I was in a different mind frame and I was more available to accept that support, and that changed me and my outlook on life hugely. So that's great. Sure. Okay, so I hear that Ed is back, and hopefully we can hear him and he can hear us. So Nicola has a few questions for Ed. Hopefully we can have some success with this.
Hello, Ed.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it has been an ordeal, let me tell you.
Well, we're so glad to have you, and we're glad that you were able to make it work just in the nick of time. So I did read your bio out. So everyone has a sort of an idea of your background, and we do have a few questions if you don't mind.
Sure.
So can you share a little bit about your role at CMHA and what you do there?
So as a transitional case manager, I would be assigned a caseload of, right now I've got about 24 people that I would meet on a regular basis based on whatever goals or needs that person is working on, whether it be housing, whether it be mental health education, discussing their medications, applying for ODSP or Ontario Works, whatever goal, going back to school, finding a job, all those types of things. And then I would meet with that individual and we would develop basically a contract that we would work on for a period of about 4 to 6 months, and work towards those goals. And then at that 6-month time, because we are transitional in nature, we would sort of freeze that account or close that account out and bring new people in. And then the transitional model allows for those people to come back if 3, 4, 5 months down the road or a year down the road, they've something else comes up and they need some supports.
Great. So you really help people with whatever it is that they need help with.
Right. And so it's called an individual rehabilitation plan is what we develop in conjunction with the participant. And so it is goal oriented and it's developed by them in consultation with us.
Amazing. Thank you. And can you tell us a little bit about your history with epilepsy?
So my diagnosis would have come in the summer of 1999 after my first year of college. In the latter parts of 97 into 98, I was developing these tics, and they didn't seem right. And then that's how I described them. Later, I found out that these tics were actually seizure activities. I thought it was just from one too many shots to the head. When I played hockey, you can see my little tribute to Wayne Gretzky behind me. I played hockey and I like to play a rough style. I also played football. lots of contact sports, sustained a lot of concussions, so I just thought it was related to that. Turns out, once I saw a neurologist in British Columbia, I was diagnosed with juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, which I've managed with medications and then adhering to, you know, a lifestyle that's as stress-free as possible, which is sometimes difficult to do with 2 young children. And making sure that I'm getting my rest, taking my meds as part of that as well, and then diet and exercise.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I always tell people epilepsy loves routine.
Absolutely.
So do you have any tips for youth that are currently struggling with their mental health?
When it comes to mental health, it's making sure, and we're seeing this across the board, and it's getting a real, it's starting to become more of a conversation piece and be less of a taboo subject. So encouraging youth to make sure that if something doesn't feel right, to talk to someone that they trust, whether it's starting with a friend or a parent or a teacher or some sort of confidant, and going from there. I find that, and one of the things that I talk to a lot of the individuals I support and kind of encourage them to do is, if you name a situation or if you name a problem or an issue, well, then that's a problem halved. So that's one of the sort of like catchphrases that I always say to them. You know, a problem shared is a problem halved. So if specifically when it comes to suicidal thoughts, right? If we go that far, individuals, if you're kind of stuck in your head and those thoughts are rumbling around in your head, you're the only one that's combating those particular thoughts, and to live inside those thoughts and have those thoughts attacking you on a minute-to-minute basis or an hourly basis or a day-to-day basis, whatever it may be, it's not enjoyable. So the more that you can share those feelings and thoughts with someone else, then you can help sort of demystify and take away the power that those thoughts then have over you.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Thank you so much for sharing. Can you think of 1 or 2 methods that a youth can use to cope with anxiety?
So before I froze up and got to present, I was listening to Michael speak, and he was hitting the nail on the head with some of the things that he was saying. I don't know if you could see me nod in agreement, but certainly some of the things that he was talking about. And one of the tips that they give a lot of individuals who kind of struggle with that anxiety piece is do that personal inventory. Get an idea of what anxiety feels like, how it manifests itself in your body. What are the thoughts that come to your head? How does it feel in your body? Kind of look at anxiety and how it affects all 5 of your senses. Once you've got that personal inventory, then you can have an idea of when it's coming on, and but like Michael said, learning to develop for yourself those coping techniques that work for you, because there's no cookie cutter answer on how to deal with anxiety or any particular issue. So really doing that personal inventory. And then the other thing that I had a gentleman that I used to work with, and I just talked to him about, well, he would always pose to me, well, what if my anxiety comes on when I'm out in the community or at home and all those sorts of things? So one of the things that I would encourage him to do is comprise a list of positive coping strategies that he could utilize in various situations, right? So doing the personal inventory helps you identify, but it doesn't necessarily always stop the anxiety from manifesting and causing issue or concern. So when you're in that situation, what is it that you can do for yourself to kind of bring yourself back down to a manageable level? So Michael talked about doing those breathing techniques and him standing up on one leg and those sorts of things. So identify what works for you, and then having those tools readily available to you. So this individual that I used to work with, he really liked Sudoku and those sorts of things. So he kept Sudoku and crosswords in the glove box of his vehicle, so that if he was in the community, he would just retreat to his car and kind of do those things to kind of bring himself back to a place of centeredness.
Awesome. So really finding what works for you and then going with that. Great.
Right.
And have you seen a change in youth mental health since COVID-19 began?
So this one is a bit tricky because the transitional case management role that I fill at CMHA, we were deemed a non-essential service. So a lot of the support that I've been doing over these past few months has been done virtually. Phone calls, text messages, emails, some redeployment hours through our crisis center and those sorts of things. So I can't say specifically how it's affected youth, but it certainly has affected everyone significantly because we've redeployed a lot of our staff to our reach out crisis line in various crisis services that we offer through CMHA Middlesex, because the sheer volume of calls has increased exponentially. Whether they're calling reach out, whether they are attending the crisis center, having contact with our mobile crisis team, we've just seen the numbers go through the roof.
Yeah, so there's definitely been some changes then. We do have actually an audience member asked as well, so this is a little bit relevant to what you're talking about. How do you know when you need to seek crisis services for mental health?
I would say if you're asking that question, then you probably need to seek crisis services.
Okay.
That would be because you don't want it to get to the point where it's become so unmanageable that you're kind of caught and you're not sure what to do. If you've got an inkling that maybe going to talk to someone can help alleviate whatever it is that's kind of bothering you or plaguing you, the thoughts or what have you, it's best to just go and speak to someone in crisis, and maybe they give you some supports or some resources to help you cope going further, or worst case scenario, you've now got another safety net or another support that you're familiar with, that when and if these feelings should resurface, you know that you've got some supports.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, Ed, and for all your insights, and of course for working through all of those technical difficulties.
All right. Thank you.
And just as we sort of approach the last few minutes of the webinar, I'm going to hand it back over to Katie.
We've had a couple questions come in recently, so I just wanted to touch on those. Michael, this one is for you. This woman says, my daughter is having a really hard time lately. Her mental health has been getting worse since COVID-19 because of the isolation. How can I help her practice mindfulness and see the value in it? And is there any value in me doing it with her, or should it be done individually?
Yes. That's my short answer, but both are great. But you know what, I was so happy to hear the second part of that. I think that there is a lot of merit to young people people practicing on their own, and practicing with other young people if that's possible. And so in particular right now, if you're the person asking the question, if her daughter was able to had a buddy who was also open to maybe trying it, and they could do it together virtually, because it can feel a little funny without having someone to bounce the experience off of. So that's good. The second thing though is like what she's suggesting. Yes, 1,000 times. If the family gets involved or just people close to you in your life, it's going to be a richer experience. So absolutely.
That's great. I know in my own practice, it's come up a few times whether or not parents should do or should practice it with their child. And I always suggest Yes, as well, because it's a modeling behavior. So
Right.
that's great. There's one that came in, and maybe Jamie, maybe you could help answer this a little bit. It says, my child is really struggling with their new diagnosis of epilepsy and is in denial. My child is 16 years old. Did you have feelings like this, and how did you address them?
Oh yeah, for sure. That's something I see quite a bit, especially at the age of a youth, right? You're sort of in denial a little bit. I would say each day at a time. Like I said earlier, you know, it's something big to understand, and epilepsy is something to learn about, right? I mean, I talk about epilepsy every day, and I'm still learning about it. So it's impossible to know everything right off the bat. You know, if your child is maybe not open to meeting maybe with an educator in your area, have the parents go yourselves, right? Get the parents to get educated, spread the information, and just casually talk about it in casual conversations, right? So just bringing it up in small doses maybe, rather than making it this big conversation. And that really helps with normalizing it. I think even just talking about it, there is this stigma around it. I've met so many people who don't even want to say the word epilepsy, right? That word to them is such a negative word. But if the more we talk about it and be comfortable with it, the hope is that we can normalize it more and get rid of any of that negative stigma. So just opening yourself up and really just taking it day by day, and not taking on a huge load. Maybe learning a fact a day, or checking out, you know, one of the links on our website a day, and just reading one of them a day. So just not overloading yourself.
Completely. Thank you so much for that. So as we approach the last couple moments of this webinar, both Epilepsy Toronto and Epilepsy Southwestern Ontario would like to thank our speakers for today. I'm sure our audience can agree we have learned so much from your personal journeys and your work within the community with youth. To everybody viewing, we will be saving these webinars to both our Facebook pages, so please feel free to rewatch or share with a friend or a family member. As well, please find 2 resources included within the comment section that could be useful to you as well, especially on where to get support if you need support. For any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Epilepsy Toronto or Epilepsy Southwestern Ontario, and find your local epilepsy agency by visiting Epilepsy Ontario's website at www.epilepsyontario.org. Thanks everybody for participating, and thanks again to our 3 speakers for today.
Awesome. Thanks everyone.